There are feelings that can't be named. They're not loud, they're not sharp, but they're there, persistent, deep, and won't go away. It's like walking into a room filled with laughter, music, light, but the feeling inside is different. Not because you're unsociable, not happy, but because there's a part of you, a part that always sees more, hears more, feels more, that's quietly separating itself from the atmosphere. It's like going to a party with a telescope strapped to your face. People are talking about normal things, the weather, work, small, easy to share stories. And you're standing there, in the corner, staring at the distant sky, outside the window. Instead of seeing a smile, you see the emptiness behind it. Instead of hearing a story, you hear the vibration in the voice, the little quiver that lasts for half a second when someone says they're fine. You try to show it to them. You say, "See? Something's not right here." But they shake their heads, smile, raise their glasses again. So you take off your glasses, smile, nod, pretend you're seeing the same world as them, not because you want to lie, but because you've learned that the truth can be uncomfortable, that seeing too soon, too clearly, isn't always a gift. And no one talks about that. No one talks about how you can sense something is breaking in a relationship before it actually breaks. No one talks about being able to see the cracks before they break, about being able to see the weariness in the eyes of someone you love, even when they say they're fine, about knowing when someone is lying, not because of evidence, but because your intuition has never been wrong. You don't want to know those things, but you do. And gradually, when you live long enough with that ability, you understand that very few people are ready to hear the truth. Not because they don't care, but because they're not ready. They haven't reached the point where they can touch that pain without breaking. And so you learn to hold back. You learn to weigh honesty against acceptance. And most of the time, you choose the latter. Not because you're weak, but because you're tired. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness comes not from having no one around, but from not being able to share the things that matter most." If you hear that quote and it resonates not just in your head, but in your heart, then you probably understand. You know what it's like to want to say something deep, real, but then swallow it. Not because you don't have the words, because you've tried, and you've seen how they react. They tell you that you think too much, that you're too sensitive, that you overthink, but you know deep down that it's not cold analysis, it's feeling, it's intuition, honed over the years. You're not overthinking, you're overfeeling. And maybe you've been that way for a long time. Over time, silence becomes more comfortable than honesty. Not because you don't want to connect, but because you don't want to hurt anyone. You don't want to be a stranger in a crowd of familiar people. You choose to step back, to hold on to your clarity, as a gift the world isn't ready to receive. And then one day you realize that the gift isn't gone. It's just waiting to be used, not to save anyone, but to help you remember that seeing what others don't isn't wrong. It's a signal, a call, not to leave others but to come back to yourself. Because no one can truly walk with you until you learn not to leave yourself behind in the crowd. And if you ever feel like that, stay, because this journey doesn't start with you joining the crowd. It starts when you dare to hold that telescope, not to hide from the world, but to shine a light on the truth within it. It's a little spoken truth. Knowing ahead of time isn't always an advantage. Sometimes it's a penalty, because knowing too early means feeling the pain before anyone else sees it coming. You're the only one who sees the dark clouds on the horizon, while everyone else is still sunbathing. And when you speak up, they don't thank you. They look at you like you're ruining the fun. You warn. You tell them something's wrong. But instead of listening, they tell you that you're negative, worried, or even looking for trouble. You're not looking for anything. You're just seeing what they're not ready to see. And slowly you learn that in a world of comfort and denial, sanity is unwelcome. It's like the old story of Cassandra, the woman who was blessed with the gift of prophecy, but cursed that no one would believe her. She saw the Trojan War, saw death, saw betrayal, saw the gates of Troy opening to welcome the wooden horse. She screamed, begged, pleaded, but no one listened. They said she was crazy. She hadn't lost her ability to see the future. She'd lost her audience. And that was the tragedy. You've been Cassandra, not in the mythical sense, but in the very real sense. You've known a relationship was ending before the other person did. You've felt the subtle changes in people's hearts, the averted gaze, the unnaturally long silence, the slightly different pronunciation of "it's okay." And you've said it, only to be met with denial, even anger. And then when everything fell apart as you'd foreseen, no one came back to say you were right. But you didn't need their approval. You never wanted to be right. You just wanted to be believed. Knowing doesn't give you control over the outcome. It only makes you feel more helpless, because no one is willing to come out of the dream to face what you've seen all along. Early awakening makes you the most uncomfortable person in the room, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you're carrying the truth when everyone else is choosing to believe something more comfortable. And then, to avoid being left out, you learn to keep quiet, not because you can't see anymore, but because you're tired of not being believed. You start to reframe your words to make them softer, more acceptable, more safe. Gradually you stop talking, even though there's still that quiet, broken feeling inside you when you see someone walking into something you know will hurt them. You want to speak up, but you're no longer sure you're allowed to. You start to doubt yourself. Am I really seeing clearly, or am I just imagining things? You used to trust your intuition as a guide, but after dozens of denials, you start to put it aside. You tune yourself out of being the cool guy. And every time you do, you feel a part of you retreat, shrink, lose your voice. Premature awareness doesn't make you strong, it makes you alone. In the crowd you're still laughing and talking, but inside you're observing things that others don't see. You're anticipating the twists, the wounds, the conflicts that are forming from seemingly small things. And you realize one thing: you may not be the only one who feels it, but you're the only one who can't ignore it. Feeling too much keeps you in a constant state of preparation for what's coming. But the world doesn't run on intuition. It runs on what can be measured, what can be seen, what can be rationalized. And if you can't prove what you know with numbers, with logic, it's worthless to others, even if it's true. So you choose to stay silent, not because you want to hide it, but because you've seen enough to know that the truth needs time. Not everyone is ready to listen, and you don't always have to be the one to speak. But deep inside you there's still the question: so what do I do with all the things I see? You can't push them away. They don't disappear. They just stay silent, waiting for a safe place to speak. And maybe you don't need to try to explain or prove it anymore. Maybe what you need is not to make people believe you, but to believe in yourself. To believe that early recognition is a gift, even if it sometimes brings sadness. And that, no matter how many times you keep silent, that intuition is still there, still listening, still waiting for the day when you no longer need to ask permission to see clearly. Because there's nothing wrong with knowing in advance. The only thing wrong is making yourself believe you have to apologize for it. There are parts of you that you never willingly confront, not because they are bad, but because they are complex, contradictory, unnameable. They are not present on your face every day, but sometimes in a moment when you act in a way that you do not understand, they appear, a sharp word you did not intend to say, a strong emotion that flares up without reason, a strange look from someone that leaves you stuck for days. It is not you, at least not the part you are familiar with, but it is you, the part you have never really touched. Carl Jung called them the anima and the animus, the unconscious shadows, the hidden figures within, representing the energy opposite to your biological sex, not feminine or masculine in the simple sense, but symbols of the elements within you that have not yet been fully lived. For men, it's the anima, the soft, emotional, intuitive, chaotic part of the soul. For women, it's the animus, the rational, logical, willful, judgmental part. They're not wrong, but when they're not recognized, they go haywire, and when they're rejected, they speak up in ways that make you act differently than you are. You've probably experienced it without even knowing what it's called. An unusual thrill when you meet someone you don't know, an inexplicable emotional obsession, an overly aggressive reaction in a seemingly normal argument. You wonder, why am I doing this? I didn't mean to, but you did it anyway. And then there's the feeling of being unfamiliar with yourself, as if someone else has taken over and is living inside you. Jung warned clearly, these shadows, when they're unconscious, are more than just distractions. They can be dangerous. He calls them elements with mysterious powers, sometimes capable of causing tragedy, not because they are evil, but because they have been repressed for too long. And anything that is denied will find a way to come back, not through the front door, but through unconscious actions, out of control reactions, and repeated bad choices. Have you ever wondered why you are drawn to a certain type of person, even though you know they are not right for you? Why do you trust, love, and idealize someone you only know a small part of? That is your anima or animus at work. They are not there to make you miserable. They are there to show you a part of yourself that you have not yet integrated. You see tenderness, or depth, or steadiness, or confidence in the other person, but in reality, it is an echo of yourself, a part that you have not dared to live, have not allowed to exist, and now it is trying to return through another person. When you are not aware of these shadows, you do not love the real person. You love the projection of yourself onto them. You love the lack in you that is temporarily filled through a connection. And because of that, that love is fragile, easily broken, because it is not built on truth, but on an unhealed inner lack. In women, the unreconciled animus often appears in the form of the inner critic, always analyzing, doubting, devaluing emotions. It makes you rigid, difficult to connect, difficult to believe in your own vulnerability. In men, the unintegrated anima can make you live in extreme emotions, prone to unrealistic romantic fantasies, or vice versa, so afraid of emotions that the heart freezes completely. The problem is not gender. The problem is ignorance. When you don't acknowledge the opposing parts of yourself, they don't go away. They speak out through obsessions, through insecurities, through emotions you can't control. And when you do, you don't live freely. You react. You struggle. You try to maintain stability on the outside, while inside there's a constant battle. Jung didn't write this theory to make you feel afraid of your inner self. He wrote it to help you talk to those invisible parts, like talking to an old friend you've forgotten. When you start observing, acknowledging, talking to, and no longer pushing them aside, those shadows soften from a force that's driving you astray. They become a guide. They help you understand yourself better. They help you see why you love someone so much that you lose your mind, why you react so violently to someone who hasn't done anything wrong, why you always feel lacking, even when you have enough. Reconciliation with the anima and the animus doesn't happen in one sitting. It's a process. But every time you realize, oh, this is my animus being overly critical, or this is my anima making me idealize, you've taken a step forward. No longer being guided by the unconscious, you begin to live with autonomy, and from there all your connections become more real, more healthy. And perhaps the most important thing Jung left us with is not a theory. It's a reminder that you don't have to split yourself into pieces to be loved. You just have to be brave enough to name every part of you. Even the parts you don't understand. Even the parts you're afraid of, because you can't be yourself if you're still denying half of yourself. There are stories that are not just for retelling, but for reflecting on. Legends that seem ancient, but when you listen with your heart, you realize they are not in the past. They are repeating in another form in your life today. And the story of the king and the well is one of them. Once upon a time there was a king who ruled a kingdom that was not large, not powerful, but peaceful. He did not rule by force or war, but by wisdom. The people loved him for his justice, for his ability to listen, for the clarity that radiated from his eyes. No one feared him. They trusted him. One night when the city was sleeping, a wizard came quietly and put a few drops of medicine into the only well in the entire city. It was a public well. Everyone from the elderly to the children, soldiers to merchants, drank from it. But that night, only the king did not drink. He had his own source of water in the palace. The next morning, the whole city woke up and began to act strangely. They became confused, paranoid, insecure. They suspected each other, made up baseless theories. They blamed, argued, suddenly changed their beliefs. It was all like a collective coma, but to each other they were fine. They still laughed, still communicated, still called it the new normal. Only the king, the only one who did not drink from the well, began to become different. He spoke clearly, but no one understood. He repeated the principles they themselves had believed in, but they looked at him with suspicion. "Why don't you understand?" they asked. "The world has changed." He became lost in his own kingdom. Gradually, whispers arose. They said he had lost his mind, that he was no longer relevant, that he needed to be replaced. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because he was no longer like them. That night, the king stood alone in the great hall. In his hand he held a cup of water from the well. No one had ordered it. No one had forced it. But he understood. This was a choice. Drink and become part of the group, or not drink and be excluded from the very place he had protected. And he drank. The next morning, the people cheered. "The king is well again." They rejoiced. "Finally he understands," they said. "He is like us, again." But in truth, he understood nothing. He was just tired of not being understood. And the price of clarity, a loneliness he could no longer bear. That story may sound sad, but it is not just the tragedy of a king. It is your story, of everyone who has ever held on to clarity in a world that chooses to live on illusion. It is a metaphor for those moments when you know what is right, what is real, what needs to be said, but you choose to be silent, choose to nod, choose to blend in with the crowd, even though inside you are melting, because you know, instinctively, that telling the truth won't just lose you support. It could lose you your own team, your family, your friends, your community, your job, all the places that used to be home. You begin to realize what people call okay is really just blind agreement. Safe conversations, comfortable relationships, fake handshakes, as long as no one mentions what's really going on. And so you drink from that well too, not to live in a false sense, but because you're tired of being misunderstood. You still see, you still feel, you still know, but you sit back, you rephrase, you soften your feelings, you hide your intuition, you fit in, and people say you've grown up. But there's one thing no one says. Every time you give in to the truth, to stay, a part of you retreats and goes silent. You don't lose yourself all at once, but through 100 little times, nodding when you should shake your head, smiling when you want to be silent, staying when your mind has left. Jung wrote, "The greatest danger lies not in being wrong. It lies in losing yourself in the crowd." And he was right. Being sober does not make you superior to others, but it does make you different, and being different always comes with the fear of being separated. That is why so many people drink from the well. They are not stupid, they are just tired. They choose acceptance over honesty. But the question is not, are you more sober than others? It is, how will you stay sober when the world calls you crazy? You can choose to drink, like the king, or not. But know that it is at that boundary that you will see most clearly. The price of being understood is sometimes the renunciation of what you truly know. And if you are holding that cup of water in your hand, not drinking it yet, just looking at it, then please do not rush. Because who knows, not too far away, there is also someone looking at you, waiting with silent eyes, because they are also tired from being drunk, and are longing for someone sober enough to lead them back. Pain doesn't always scream. Some pains enter your life with absolute silence. It doesn't need words, it doesn't need reasons, it doesn't need tears. It just needs a slight nod, a fleeting frown, a truth you swallow because you know that if you speak it out loud, you'll be seen as too much. That's the silent price of awareness. No one prepares you for that. No one tells you that the more you feel, the sooner you see clearly, the more you'll learn to keep quiet. Not because you don't want to talk, but because you've learned from experience. When you talk, people often don't listen. And when they listen, they don't believe. And when they believe, it's often too late. So you start to pull back. Not from people, but from yourself. You edit your feelings to make them more digestible for others. You leave out details that you know are true, but that will make the listener uncomfortable. You choose okay answers over the truth. And strangely enough, people like you more when you are less yourself. You become someone everyone finds comfortable. Someone who listens, who sympathizes, who knows when to keep their distance. But they don't know that every time you take a step back, you are moving away from your true self. You still live, still work, still laugh. But there are times, in the middle of a conversation, when you feel like you're not really there. You catch the averted gaze, feel the change in tone, see the awkward silence between two sentences. You know what's really going on, but you don't say it, because you're so used to being overly sensitive. It's not the loud kind of pain. It's like a constant soundtrack in your head, soft, but never stops. You can ignore it, but it doesn't go away. It becomes part of you, like breathing. And sometimes you forget that it's a burden, because you've been carrying it for so long. Psychologists call it masking, hiding your true feelings, thoughts, and perceptions to fit in, to avoid being uncomfortable. Others might call it being reasonable. But the truth is, it's how you learn to survive in a world that doesn't allow for depth. And every time you do it, you convince yourself that your intuition doesn't matter, but it does, very much. The price of being awake isn't that you see too much, but that you have to live in a society that doesn't want to see it with you. And so you have to pack everything up, your feelings, your intuition, your thoughts, to fit into a rhythm that you never really belonged to. You learn to adapt. You become an expert at reading the room, adjusting your tone, laughing at the right times, pausing at the right times. You live your life as if you were a draft that has been edited for comfort, and no one knows how much you have left unsaid in each pause. And at some point, your body starts to speak, not in words, but in exhaustion. You feel empty, tired, disconnected. You have everything it takes to be alive, but you no longer have a reason to feel alive. It's not that you're weak. It's not that you're negative. You're just so used to not being yourself. And it slowly wears you down, like water dripping onto a rock. Carl Jung called this state soul loss, a disconnection from your soul. Not because you've lost it. It's because you've closed it off, locked it away, because there's no one safe enough for you to open it to. The soul doesn't disappear. It just goes silent. And if you let the silence last long enough, you will forget your true voice. But there is something very true here. No one can live your life for you. No one can feel it for you. And no one can take responsibility for the part you choose to hide. So the question is not, how can I get others to accept me for who I am? The question is more, do you still have the courage to not give up on yourself? The path to awakening is never easy, but the most beautiful thing is you don't have to go fast. You just have to start with one small thing, one true sentence, one time not to nod when your heart is shaking, one time not to laugh it off, but to choose honest silence. And little by little, you will no longer have to be the only one who understands everyone, while no one understands you, because you begin to understand yourself again, without anyone else's permission. Not all wounds heal through forgetting. Some only soften when they are looked at. When you stop seeing them as something to be hidden, something to be overcome, and start listening to them as part of a story you never dared to tell. It is in that moment, where you stop resisting, stop straining to be okay, that the burden begins to transform, not disappear, but change shape, change substance, change direction. And then something strange happens. You realize that you no longer consider deep feeling a curse. You begin to realize it is not that you are too much. It is that the world is too accustomed to little listening, to little feeling, to little presence. And when you live in the fullness of feeling, of awareness, of deep connection, you become strange, but not wrong, just strange, in a world that repeats the same things over and over again. Before you wore your sophistication like a heavy cloak, something that made you stand out, but also made you tired of carrying it. Now, you carry it like a small lamp, not to attract attention, but to light the way. Not for anyone else, for yourself. A modest light, but enough to recognize every pebble on the path you're walking. Because now you understand feelings are not burdens, they are maps. The times you sensed something was wrong with someone, even though they were still smiling, that was the map. The times you saw a relationship tilting before it fell, that was the map. The dreams, the premonitions, the strange feelings you used to ignore, you now start to see them as living data, not scientific, not logical, but honest. And most importantly, they are the voice of the part of you that the world has told you to silence. Carl Jung called this journey individuation, the process of becoming a whole person, not a perfect person, a full person, a person who is not divided between emotion and reason, between intuition and analysis, between darkness and light. All exist together. No exclusion, no denial, no need to hide. You begin to realize you don't need to choose between being accepted and being yourself, because the most lasting acceptance doesn't come from others. It comes from within. When you stop letting go of the soft, confused, conflicted parts of yourself, when you see them not as troublemakers, but as messengers, every emotion comes to send you a message. Every hurt comes to point to an unopened door. And when you begin to listen, instead of suppress, you are no longer controlled by what you don't understand. You no longer love out of lack, no longer anger out of fear, no longer seek outside for what you never gave yourself inside. True freedom doesn't come when you've overcome everything that's ever hurt you. It comes when you can sit with that pain, touch it, and not be swallowed by it. You're no longer swept away by emotions like you used to be, because you're no longer afraid of them. They're no longer the tide that drags you to the bottom. They're the water you learn to swim in. Sometimes cold, sometimes turbulent, but you know you're not drowning. You're alive. And then one day someone sits across from you, eyes troubled, voice out of tune, heart screaming silently, and you recognize that look, that voice, that heartbeat, because you've been there, and you don't need explaining. You don't need rescuing. You just need to be there. Real enough, still enough, bright enough, and that's enough. The burden you once hid has turned to light. Not because it's lighter, but because you're stronger. Not because things are okay, but because you are no longer afraid of things not being okay. And so the light doesn't just shine on you. It begins to attract others, people who are not looking for someone perfect, but for someone real, someone deep enough to understand, strong enough to stand, quiet enough to listen. You don't have to teach anyone anything. You don't have to prove anything. Your presence is an invitation, a silent but resounding invitation, that anyone can be real, that emotions are not something to be ashamed of, that seeing more, feeling more, understanding more, is not too much. It is a gift, and that gift finally has found its worthy recipient. You have traveled a long journey, not on the map, but in your heart. You have crossed lands that others cannot see, cold places of loneliness when you realize too early, winding paths of silence and self-doubt, emotional crossroads you once dared not name. And now, looking back, you may realize you are no longer the one who started that journey. You no longer try to run away from the burden you carry, no longer try to prove to the world that you are not too sensitive, not too thoughtful, not lost. Because you have understood, those things that were once considered too much are the special part of you, the part that makes you live truly, feel truly, connect truly. And then you begin to realize something else, that you are not as alone as you once thought. Carl Jung once wrote, "If you do your work honestly and wholeheartedly, people you do not know will come to you. Not the crowd, not the loud applause, but people like you. People who have kept quiet for fear of being misunderstood. People who have cowered in a crowded room. People who have seen things earlier than everyone else and were considered trouble, a nuisance. They are there, scattered everywhere, like stars hidden behind clouds, and they are looking for light. Not the light of someone perfect, strong, well-spoken, shining, but the gentle light of someone who has walked through the darkness and kept his heart warm. The light of someone who dares to speak the truth, even if his voice is shaky. The light of someone who doesn't sugarcoat it, doesn't pretend to know, just shows up in all their honesty and life. You may never have met them, but they are listening to you. You may never have seen them, but they are looking for people like them. And every time you are authentic, you speak up, you refuse to be a copy of someone else. You are sending a signal, a silent but clear call. I am here, really here, not pretending, not adjusting to fit. And someone, somewhere, will see that signal and sigh, finally, someone like me. That's how people like you find each other. Not loudly, but intuitively, by feeling seen, understood, before they can even say it out loud. But for that to happen, you need to stop. Stop shrinking back because you've been rejected. Stop diluting your emotions to make yourself more acceptable. Stop pretending not to see the obvious, just because others aren't ready to see it with you. And that's not easy. Because the truth is, you may lose some relationships that only exist when you're not yourself. But what you gain in return is freedom and real connection. When you're authentic, you may stand alone in many rooms, but you won't feel lonely in the same way anymore. Because now, you're no longer trading yourself for the sake of staying, and that makes you stronger. Not because you don't need anyone, but because you have yourself. Your true presence, without the mask, is the gift you bring to the world. It's not perfect, but it's real. And in an age of pretense, the real is the rarest thing, the most valuable. You'll begin to realize you don't need many people, you just need the right people. People who don't shrink back from your depth. People who don't see you as too complicated, but as necessary. People who don't tell you to stop thinking, but sit with you in that thought, not rushing to end it, just staying together. And when it happens, you'll understand all those years of feeling alone, of feeling wrong, of feeling like an exception, were actually preparation. Not for you to be someone else, but for you to have the courage to be yourself. Because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more real people. It needs people who listen to what no one else says. People who can sit with pain and not shy away. People who aren't afraid of the dark because they've lived it. And maybe you're one of them. If you've been holding back, wondering, will my truth be heard? Take this as a sign that it's time to speak. Not because you need to be believed, but because you deserve to be heard. Even if it's just a word, a line, a breath. But it's true, because every time you do, you keep the deepest part of you from falling asleep. And who knows, someone on the other side of the screen, on the other side of the city, on the other side of their pain, will see you, hear you, and whisper in their heart, finally, I'm not the only one.